Wayne here. In this video, I'd like to discuss the topic of political instability. I'm going to be doing this video in multiple parts because there are a lot of moving parts to this video. I mentioned in the previous video that I thought that the world was relatively calm compared to where I think it's going to be as we approach the end times. One of the things I mentioned that I thought we would see would be a lot more political instability in the world. The reason why I think we're going to see a lot more political instability in the world is because the Bible indicates that we will. Luke 21, Mark 13, and Matthew 24 are three chapters that relate, I think, to the concept of birth pangs and the coming Christ. Luke 21 is unique compared to Mark 13 and Matthew 24 in that verse 9 mentions the word commotions. And the Greek word for commotions is right here, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. I can barely speak English as it is. Why would I try to pronounce Greek? So the definition for that word is disturbance, upheaval, revolution, almost anarchy, first in the political and thence in the moral sphere. So the idea is that commotions would relate to political instability, revolutions, and upheaval. So chaos, basically, in the political sphere. The concept of birth pangs is that you will see an event, and then things will calm down, and then things will pick up, calm down, and then as you get closer to a major event, the frequency and intensity of the events would increase. Now, some people think that birth pangs are restricted to the 7th week of Daniel. I do not believe that birth pangs are restricted within the 7th week of Daniel. We are experiencing birth pangs right now, but in the future, the birth pangs will become more intense as we approach the end times. So with that, I think we're going to see more political instability in the future because the Bible indicates that we will. So with that, the end of part 1. See you in part 2. With this video. In this part, I would like to talk about the importance of political instability. And I'm going to illustrate the importance of political instability by talking about what has happened in recent decades in terms of conflict. This over here on the left where the mouse is located, there is a chart that shows this black here shows the total warfare in the world. This total warfare includes like internal wars like civil war and external wars like war between different states. As you can see, the black line has rose all the way up to the later part of the 1980s, and then it declined suddenly. It's interesting, Bible prophecy commentators talk about, they like to sensationalize headlines, basically. They like to talk about how unstable things are, how chaotic things are, how today is unlike any other time in history. The thing I like about data isn't emotional. Data is calm. Data doesn't sensationalize headlines. So with data, I could argue against any Bible prophecy commentator, and I would say to them that the world, in terms of war, in terms of this chart, I could argue is relatively more calm now than it has been in recent decades. I don't like sensationalizing headlines. This is why I don't talk about, oh, this is it, this has got to be it, this is it, it's any minute now type of stuff. I don't like sensationalizing stuff because the data will not support that conclusion. So with that little mini rant, I'm going to continue with the chart. So the warfare has dropped in recent decades. With that, the number of democracies has dramatically increased. And if we would continue this chart out to 2015, the black is relatively stable at this level, and the number of democracies have continued to increase in the world. Down here, we have another measure. We have number of wars, international wars between 1816 and 2005. The number of dictatorships or non-democracies versus non-democracies has been 205 wars. The number of wars between democracies and non-democracies has been 166. The number of wars between democracies and versus democracies has been 0. This chart goes to 2005. I don't know if Israel versus Lebanon 2006 would count, but basically, this chart has basically led to the theory of democratic peace, which is basically democracies virtually do not fight other democracies. Now, why other democracies do not fight each other has been heavily debated. The democratic peace is a controversial theory. It's a very interesting theory. Um, so the democratic peace would continue to posit as the number of democracies increase in the future, the less war we would see on the planet. Now, the importance of political instability would reverse the trend in democracies in the world, and we would see fewer democracies in the world, and we would see probably a rise in the number of dictatorships or autocracies in the world. So to have a world more conducive for war in the future, we would need to see political instability reversing the trends in democracies in the world. And I think that's what we're going to see, which I will talk about in part 3. So I'm done with part 2, so that's it for now. See you in part 3. We're here with part 3 of this video. In this part of the video, I'd like to talk about what I think is going to be causing the political instability of the future. As we saw in part 1, we are going to see more political instability in the future because the Bible indicates so. Political instability or commotions is a part of the birth pangs. The concept of birth pangs being that the closer we get to a major event, the more things will accelerate in frequency and intensity. So political instability is something that is going to be coming. Back in college, I was kind of weird. College students sometimes we were in the classroom bored because the professor's talking about nothing in particular that was interesting. Some college students might be thinking about what party they're going to go to, or what errands they have to run, or some big assignment in the next class. Well, that was kind of weird. I would sit in the classroom and I would think to myself, what could cause political chaos in the world in the future? And it dawned on me one day that the probable cause of political instability of the future on a global basis would be economic instability. I think that economic instability is the key to the political instability of the future. I think back to the late 1920s, early 1930s, and I really think back to Germany. The Nazi Party back then in the late 1920s was not popular. They weren't popular at all. But it was the Great Depression that created this atmosphere in Germany where voters became desperate, and they looked to the Nazi Party to help them. They looked to the Nazi Party for hope. And what economic chaos does is it causes voters to not look at the centrist parties, the center parties, but they look at more the extreme parties because the centrist parties have failed them before and during the early stages of the economic instability. So they go to the radical parties. So like in Greece, the party that was thrown out in the early part of the crisis was a centrist party. Currently in Greece, they have a party that identifies themselves as the radical left in Syriza. The number 3 party in Greece right now is the Golden Dawn. And if you are interested in about things, I would suggest you look into the Golden Dawn. You will probably be hearing a lot more about them in the future, and they may be running the country in the future. I don't have a crystal ball, but I wouldn't be surprised if they are running the country in the future. So you have this scenario where economic instability causes these radical parties who may have this desire to take over the country completely a chance to gain power. So, you know what the scary thing is? This has happened before. In the 1920s and 1930s, what happened was, in the 1930s, the number of democracies actually declined in the world, and the number of dictatorships or autocracies actually increased. With that, we had the Second World War. We had the spike in dictatorships and a huge decrease relatively in the number of democracies in the world. So in the future, as the political instability reverses the democracy trends in the world, you will see a war more conducive for war. And the scary thing about birth pangs is, as you get closer to an event, the more intense and frequent it becomes. I wouldn't be surprised if the war that we see in the future is much, much, much worse than what we see today, and much, much, much worse than the wars we've seen in recent decades. It could be really, really bad. But first, we will need that economic instability. I do not know exactly when the global economy will buckle, but it looks like At least in my humble opinion, we're getting close to that. We're getting close to the part where the global economy starts buckling, and with that, we'll have the rise of political instability, and with that, regime change in a world much more conducive for war. So it's going to be an interesting next few years, and with that, Wayne signing off. Goodbye.